The Grand Rotunda was the largest structure ever built by any living species in the known galaxy, and it floated in a slow orbit around a dead neutron star called Velhari Prime, spinning like a jewel made of glass and light and arrogance. Ambassador Elara Voss stepped off the transport shuttle and felt the weight of 10,000 alien eyes fall on her like cold rain. And not a single pair of those eyes carry anything close to respect. She was human. That was enough for them to look away. The corridors of the rotunda stretched for miles in every direction, carved from a pale crystal that hummed with a faint vibration she could feel in her teeth. And as she walked toward the central chamber, she passed delegates from species that had ruled the stars for millions of years before Earth even had fire. A pair of Velnori diplomats glided past her without a word, their translucent skin glowing faintly blue, their 4 arms folded behind their backs in a gesture. She had learned meant, "You are beneath my notice." A group of Thorosi officers stood near a pillar, their scaled bodies wrapped in black military uniforms covered in medals and rank markers. And when they saw her, they made a sound that was something between a laugh and a growl. She kept walking. Elara Voss had been Earth's ambassador to the Galactic Covenant for only 9 months. But she had already learned the most important lesson this place had to teach. Nobody here cared about humanity, and nobody here ever would, not unless something forced them to. The central chamber opened before her, like the mouth of some massive creature, a circular room so wide that the far side disappeared into a haze of soft golden light, with thousands of seats rising in tiers all around a central platform, where speakers addressed the full covenant. She found Earth's assigned seat, small, far from the center, tucked between the representatives of 2 species she had never even heard of, and she sat down without complaint. The session began when Archon Sivalith took the central platform. He was the Speaker of the Galactic Covenant, a Velnori elder who stood nearly 9 feet tall, with skin so pale it was almost white, and 4 arms that moved with slow grace as he spoke. And his voice echoed through the chamber, like the sound of something ancient and unquestionable. "We gather today to discuss the redistribution of territorial and economic rights within the Orion Spur," he announced, and Elara felt her stomach tighten, because she already knew what that meant. The Orion Spur was where Earth lived. It was where every human colony existed, where every human trade lane operated, where every human shipyard floated in the black between stars. And when the Covenant said redistribution, they meant, "We are going to take what is yours." The first proposal came from the Drenari Collective, a species of tall insectoid creatures who wanted Earth's outer trade corridors, because human ships were too slow and too few to justify such generous allocations. The second came from the Macaulay Federation, who argued that Earth's deep space shipyard in the Tau Ceti system should be placed under Covenant oversight because humanity lacked the technical sophistication to operate such a facility safely. Elara activated her translation earpiece and stood to speak, raising her hand in the formal gesture that requested the floor. Archon Sivalith looked at her for a long moment, and then looked away as if she had not moved at all. She kept her hand raised. The third proposal came from the Thorosi Dominion, and it was Delegate Crethon himself who delivered it, a massive reptilian figure with deep green scales and a voice like grinding stone, the representative of the most powerful military force in the galaxy. He did not bother with politeness. "Let us stop pretending," Crethon said, his words rolling through the chamber with casual cruelty. "Humanity is the mold that grew on the Covenant's shoe, tolerated out of pity, never out of respect, and certainly never out of necessity." The chamber erupted in laughter, not all of it, but enough. Waves of alien amusement rippling through the tiers like wind through tall grass, and Elara stood there, with her hands still raised and her face perfectly still. "Their colonies produce nothing of value," Crethon continued. Their fleet is a joke, their science is primitive, and their presence in this chamber is an embarrassment to every species that actually earned its seat here. More laughter. Archon Civilith finally turned to Alara and gave a small nod, granting her the floor with the kind of reluctant courtesy one might show a child who had wandered into an adult conversation. She stepped forward and began to speak, calmly, clearly, with the measured tone of someone who had spent her entire career choosing her words with surgical precision. The territories in question were allocated to Earth under binding agreements signed by this very body, she said. We have developed those corridors, built infrastructure, and maintained them at our own expense for decades, and— Enough, Crethon interrupted, waving one massive clawed hand, and Archon Civilith did not stop him. The chamber moved to a vote. Resolution 4012-7A passed with an overwhelming majority. Earth's 3 outer colony trade corridors were reassigned to the Drenari and Makali, and the Tau Ceti shipyard was placed under immediate Covenant oversight, effective within 30 standard days. Ilara Voss stood in her small seat and watched the numbers appear on the display above the platform, each vote landing like a nail in a coffin, and she said nothing. She did not argue, she did not protest, she did not make a scene. She simply picked up her datapad, turned away from the platform, and walked toward the exit, while the chamber buzzed with satisfied conversation behind her. In the corridor outside, she stopped and opened a secure quantum link channel to Earth, a channel that could not be intercepted, could not be monitored, and could not be traced. On the other end, Director Marin Cole answered immediately. How did it go? Cole asked, though her voice suggested she already knew. Ilara looked back at the massive doors of the central chamber, behind which 10,000 alien delegates were celebrating their easy victory over the small, weak, insignificant humans who had no power and no voice and no future worth worrying about. They laughed, Ilara said quietly. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Not a pause of surprise, but a pause of confirmation. The kind of silence that comes when something long expected has finally arrived. Understood, Director Cole said. The channel closed. 6,000 light-years away, in a room buried deep beneath the mountains of central Switzerland, Director Marin Cole set down her communicator and stood from her desk, and she walked to a wall safe that required 3 biometric scans and a code known only to 4 people on the entire planet. She opened it and pulled out a red-labeled dossier. The words on the cover read Prometheus Contingency. She tucked it under her arm and walked down a long hallway toward a set of reinforced doors that led to the most secure room on Earth, the War Room, where the leaders of every branch of humanity's government and military were already gathering, already waiting, already prepared, because this was not a surprise. This was not a shock. This was the moment they had been planning for since the day humanity first set foot in the Galactic Covenant and realized the truth, that the galaxy did not see them as partners or allies or equals. The galaxy saw them as nothing, and nothing, as humanity had learned long ago, was the most dangerous thing you could let someone believe you were. Director Cole pushed open the doors of the War Room, laid the red dossier on the table, and looked at the faces of the 20 most powerful humans alive. It is time, she said. No one in the room smiled, but every single one of them nodded. 48 hours after the vote, the galaxy moved on as if nothing important had happened, because to the galaxy, nothing important had happened. A weak species had been put in its proper place, and the universe continued to spin. But on Earth, something was waking up. Director Marin Cole stood at the head of the War Room table and looked at the faces around her. Generals, admirals, intelligence chiefs, the Secretary General of the United Earth Government, and a woman most of them had never met before, a quiet figure with dark eyes and silver-streaked hair who sat at the far end of the table and said nothing. Her name was Dr. Inez Ferreira, and she was the chief scientist of Project Prometheus, and almost no one in this room knew what that project actually was. The Covenant has given us 30 days to comply with Resolution 40127A, Cole began, her voice flat and steady. They expect us to hand over the trade corridors and open the Tau Ceti shipyard to their inspectors. And what do we actually do? Asked Admiral Jin Songhua, a compact and sharp-eyed woman who commanded a fleet that did not officially exist. We do exactly what we have been preparing to do for the last 40 years, Cole answered, and she opened the red dossier and spread its contents across the table. The room went very quiet. The documents inside were stamped with classification levels so high that most of the people in the room had never seen that color of ink before. And what those documents described was a plan so vast and so patient that it made the Covenant's little power games look like children fighting over toys. It was called the Prometheus Contingency, and it had been born 83 years ago, on the very first day humanity joined the Galactic Covenant. Cole explained it piece by piece, and as she spoke, the room grew more and more still, not with fear, but with the heavy silence of people realizing that the ground beneath their feet was far deeper than they had ever imagined. When humanity first entered the galactic stage, its diplomats and intelligence officers had gone in with open eyes and careful ears, and what they found was not a community of equals, but a hierarchy of predators. Old species that had spent millions of years building systems designed to keep young species weak and dependent and grateful for scraps. Every treaty Earth signed was tilted against it. Trade agreements that locked humanity into selling raw materials cheap and buying finished technology at 10 times the cost. Defense pacts that sent human soldiers to fight on alien borders, but never sent alien soldiers to protect human worlds. Technology sharing accords that shared nothing at all, because every request was buried in centuries of bureaucratic delay. Earth's first intelligence directors saw the pattern within a decade, and they made a decision that would shape the next 80 years of human history. Would play along. They would smile. They would sign every unfair treaty and accept every insult. And while the galaxy laughed at them, they would build something in the dark. The first layer of the plan was economic. Human engineers and scientists and doctors were sent across the galaxy to work on alien worlds, not as conquerors, but as helpers. And over the decades, they wove themselves into the fabric of galactic civilization so deeply that pulling them out would tear the cloth apart. Human agricultural scientists designed crop systems that fed 40 alien worlds, and human doctors developed treatments used in hospitals across 600 planets. And human engineers maintained communication relay stations that connected entire sectors of space. And none of this was an accident. Every placement, every assignment, every act of generosity was a thread in a web that Earth was spinning with quiet and deliberate purpose. The second layer was military, and this was where Admiral Jin leaned forward with sharp attention. For decades, Earth had been publicly building a small and unimpressive fleet, exactly the kind of fleet a weak and harmless species would have. But in the deep void between stars, in places so empty and so dark that no sensor array in the galaxy would ever think to look, Earth had been building something else entirely. They called it the Blackwater Fleet. 1,200 warships, designed and constructed in secret shipyards, hidden inside hollowed-out asteroids in the space between solar systems. Crewed by personnel who had officially retired from military service and vanished from all public records. These were not ordinary ships. They were built with technology that the rest of the galaxy did not believe was possible. And that brought Cole to the third layer, the deepest secret of all, the reason Dr. Inez Ferreira was sitting at the end of the table. "Doctor," Cole said, "tell them about Prometheus." Ferreira stood slowly, and when she spoke her voice was calm and precise, the voice of someone who had spent her entire adult life working on something that would change the shape of reality itself. 40 years ago, she said, my team achieved what the Galactic Covenant's own science councils declared was theoretically impossible for any civilization below Type 2 classification. We cracked post-singularity energy manipulation. The silence in the room became absolute. Post-singularity energy manipulation was the ability to draw power directly from the quantum structure of spacetime itself, unlimited, clean, and so enormously powerful that a single reactor the size of a room could output more energy than a star. The Covenant's most advanced species used fusion cores and antimatter drives. Powerful, yes, but nothing compared to what Ferrero was describing, and every warship in the Blackwater Fleet was running on a Prometheus-class energy core. Each of our destroyers, Admiral Jin said slowly, reading from the dossier with something close to wonder in her voice, carries more firepower than a Thorosi dreadnought, and our shields can absorb more punishment than anything currently deployed in the galaxy. And they do not know, Cole said. Nobody knows, and that is exactly how we wanted it. The room absorbed this in heavy silence. For 83 years, humanity had been called weak and primitive and laughable. And for 83 years, humanity had let them believe it, because the lie was the most powerful weapon they had. Meanwhile, 6,000 light-years away, on the Grand Rotunda, Ambassador Alara Voss was doing something that looked perfectly innocent. She had requested copies of every treaty, agreement, pact, and resolution that Earth had ever signed with the Galactic Covenant, all 4,211 of them, citing a need for administrative review in light of the recent territorial changes. The Covenant clerks gave her everything without hesitation, because why would they worry about a human reading old paperwork? Voss spent 2 days reading every single document, marking every clause, every obligation, every promise that had been made to Earth, and every promise that had been broken, and she compiled her findings into a single encrypted file. She transmitted it to Earth on a secure channel and received a one-line reply from Director Cole. Ready on your word. Voss closed her datapad and looked out through the observation window of her small quarters at the vast starfield beyond the rotunda, and for the first time since the vote, she allowed herself to feel something other than patience. It was not anger. Anger was too hot, too reckless, too human in the way the galaxy expected humans to be. It was certainty. The certainty of someone standing at the edge of a cliff, not about to fall, but about to fly, her hand against the cold glass, and whispered to no one at all, "They have no idea what they have done." And she was right. They had no idea. 72 hours after Resolution 4012-7A, Ambassador Alara Voss sent a formal request to Archon Civilith for an emergency session of the full Galactic Council. And when the request arrived on his desk, he read it with the kind of amused curiosity a giant might feel watching an ant try to climb a wall. He approved it immediately. "Let the humans speak," he told his aides, his forearms folded in a gesture of lazy confidence. "It will be entertaining to watch them beg." The word spread quickly through the rotunda. Earth had called an emergency session. The little species wanted to talk. Come and watch. Bring your amusement and your pity, because this would surely be a performance worth remembering. And they were right about that last part, though not in the way they expected. The central chamber filled faster than it had for any session in recent memory. Thousands of delegates, from hundreds of species, packing the rising tiers of seats until every chair was full. Taken, and the overflow crowd stood along the crystal walls, and the air hummed with conversation and quiet laughter, and the particular energy that fills a room when everyone has gathered to watch something small be crushed. Alara Voss entered through the main doors and walked across the floor of the chamber, alone. She wore a simple dark suit, no medals, no symbols of rank, no ceremonial decoration of any kind. and she carried only a single datapad, and her shoes made a sharp clicking sound against the crystal floor that echoed through the massive room with each step. She reached the central platform and stepped up onto it, and 10,000 alien faces looked down at her from every direction. Archon Civilith stood at his elevated position above the platform and gave her a slow nod. "Ambassador Voss," he said, his ancient voice carrying the tone of someone granting a small mercy. "You have requested this session, and the Covenant has granted it. Speak your." Voss set her datapad on the podium and looked out at the chamber, and she did not rush, and she did not tremble, and she did not beg. "Thank you, Archon," she said, and her voice was calm and clear and carried to every corner of the room without any effort at all. "I will be brief, because what I have to say is very simple." She tapped her datapad. "Since Earth joined the Galactic Covenant 83 years ago, we have signed 4,211 treaties, agreements, pacts, accords, and resolutions with this body and its member species." She paused and let that number hang in the air. "In the past 72 hours, my team and I have conducted a full legal review of every single one of those documents, cross-referencing them with the Covenant's own records of compliance and enforcement." The laughter in the chamber had stopped, not because anyone was worried yet, but because the tone of her voice did not sound like begging. Else entirely, something they could not quite identify. "What we found," Voss continued, "is that the Covenant and its member species have violated their own treaty obligations to Earth exactly 2,307 times. A ripple of murmuring moved through the tiers. These violations include 847 instances of unfulfilled defense obligations, where Earth sent soldiers to protect alien borders and received no protection in return. 412 instances of illegal tariff manipulation that cost human colonies billions in lost revenue. 389 instances of stolen intellectual property, where human research was classified as joint development and taken without compensation. And 659 unanswered distress calls from human ships and colonies that were legally entitled to Covenant assistance and received none. The murmuring grew louder. Delegate Crethon shifted in his seat, his green scales catching the light as he leaned forward with narrowed eyes. "These are all documented in the Covenant's own records," Voss said. "I am not presenting allegations. I am reading your own files back to you." She tapped her datapad again, and the massive display screen above the platform lit up with a cascade of documents, dates, file numbers, and broken clauses, scrolling past so fast that no one could read them all, but slow enough that everyone could see just how many there were. "Under Article 9 of the Covenant's founding charter," Voss said, and now her voice carried a new edge. Not anger, not aggression, but the cold precision of a blade being drawn from its sheath. "Any member species subjected to systemic and repeated treaty violations has the legal right to unilateral withdrawal from all agreements simultaneously, without penalty, and without negotiation." The chamber went silent. Not quiet, silent. The kind of silence that falls when 10,000 beings suddenly realize, at the same time, that something terrible is about to happen. Archon Civilith's 4 hands gripped the railing of his elevated position, and for the first time in anyone's memory, his translucent face showed something that looked almost like concern. "As of this moment," Ilara Voss said, and her voice rang through the grand rotunda like a bell struck once in an empty cathedral, "Earth formally and irrevocably withdraws from every treaty, pact, trade agreement, defense accord, territorial concession, and cooperative resolution it has ever signed with the Galactic Covenant. All 4,211 of them, effective immediately." For 3 full seconds, nothing happened. Then the chamber exploded. Delegates leaped from their seats, some shouting, some turning to their aides in confusion, some frantically tapping their communication devices as the implications hit them like a wave crashing against a wall. because the implications were enormous and they were immediate. Earth's withdrawal meant that every Covenant species instantly lost access to Earth's biosphere database, the most complex and comprehensive genetic library in the known galaxy, used as the foundation for medical treatments on over 600 worlds. Earth's withdrawal meant that every joint defense agreement dissolved on the spot, and every human soldier stationed on an alien border was no longer obligated to stay. And every alien world that depended on human protection suddenly had an empty wall where a shield used to be. Earth's withdrawal meant that transit rights through the Sol system were revoked, and Sol sat at the most efficient navigational crossing point between the Orion Arm and the Sagittarius Arm, which meant that thousands of trade routes used by hundreds of species now had nowhere to go. Earth's withdrawal meant that every piece of technology co-developed under joint patents was legally recalled, and every human engineer and scientist and doctor working on an alien world was no longer bound by Earthian law. Free to leave. And every system they maintained was about to go dark. Delegate Crethon surged to his feet, his massive frame towering over the delegates around him, and his voice cut through the chaos like a blade. "This is an act of war," he roared. "The Tharasi Dominion will not tolerate this provocation. If Earth thinks it can hide behind legal tricks, it will learn what real power looks like." The chamber turned to Voss, expecting fear, expecting her to flinch, expecting the little human to realize she had gone too far. Ilara Voss looked up at Crethon, and for the first time since she had arrived at the Grand Rotunda 9 months ago, she smiled. It was not a warm smile. "You are welcome to try," she said. The words landed in the silence like a stone dropped into still water, and something about the way she said them, the absolute and total absence of fear, made Crethon pause for just a moment, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his reptilian face before his pride swallowed it whole. Across the galaxy, in that same moment, every human embassy closed its doors at exactly the same time. A synchronized shutdown, so precise that it could only have been planned months in advance. On alien worlds everywhere, human workers began packing their things. Doctors left hospitals, engineers left power stations, scientists left research labs, teachers left academies, and they did it quietly, politely, and with perfect order, thanking their alien colleagues and wishing them well. And the galaxy, for the first time in 83 years, began to understand something that it should have understood a long time ago. Humanity had not been weak. Humanity had not been helpless. Humanity had not been clinging to the Covenant out of need. The Covenant had been clinging to humanity. It just had never bothered to look down and notice. The galaxy did not fall apart all at once. It came apart in pieces, slowly at first, then faster and faster, like a machine losing one gear at a time, until the whole thing began to shake and scream. Within 12 hours of Earth's withdrawal, the first cracks appeared. On the medical world of Thesari Prime, where the largest hospital network in the Orion Arm served over 2 billion patients, every treatment protocol built on human biosphere data locked itself behind encryption walls that no alien technician could break, because the access codes belonged to Earth, and Earth had just taken them back. On the Makali Federation's main communication hub, 3 human engineers who had maintained the quantum relay arrays for 15 years handed over their access badges, boarded a shuttle, and left. And within 6 hours, the relays began drifting out of alignment, and entire sectors of space lost faster-than-light communication. On 47 agricultural worlds, across the Drenari Collective, the advanced soil management systems that human scientists had designed and installed began sending error messages that nobody knew how to fix, because the people who built those systems were already gone. It was happening everywhere, on every world, in every system, and the pattern was always the same: humans leaving quietly, politely, and without anger, and behind them, silence and confusion, and the growing realization that the galaxy had built its house on a foundation it never bothered to understand. But Delegate Crethan was not interested in understanding. He was interested in punishment. The Thoros Dominion was the greatest military power the galaxy had ever known, with a fleet of warships that had conquered entire star systems and crushed rebellions that lasted centuries. And Crethan had been humiliated in front of the entire Covenant by a human woman who had smiled at him. He would not tolerate it. 24 hours of the withdrawal. He ordered the mobilization of 300 Thoros warships, the largest single fleet deployment in a decade, and he pointed them directly at Sol System. "We will remind these insects of their place," he broadcast on an open channel that the entire galaxy could hear. "They will surrender their system, their shipyards, and their ambassador, or we will take all three by force." The fleet launched from Thoros space with the thundering confidence of a species that had never lost a war. 300 dreadnoughts and battle cruisers and heavy destroyers cutting through faster than light space like a fist aimed at the heart of humanity. And the galaxy watched, because this was what everyone expected. The natural order reasserting itself, the strong putting the weak back in their cage, the brief and amusing rebellion of a lesser species coming to its predictable and violent end. The Thoros fleet dropped out of faster than light. Travel at the edge of Sol System, sensors blazing, weapons hot, and every officer on every bridge ready for whatever pitiful defense the humans could muster. What they found instead was Admiral Jin Songhua. She was standing on the bridge of the UEN Prometheus, the flagship of a fleet that did not exist on any record in any database in the known galaxy. And around her in perfect formation were 1,200 warships, 4 times the size of the Thoros force, each one running dark until the moment the Thoros arrived, and then lighting up their systems all at once like 1,000 stars being born in the void. The Thoros fleet stopped. Every sensor on every Thoros ship screamed with data that made no sense. Power readings that were off the scale, energy signatures that did not match any known technology, shield harmonics that the computers could not even classify, let alone calculate how to penetrate. Admiral Jin opened a communication channel, Private 1, but a broadcast on every frequency available, so that every ship in the Thoros fleet, every listening post in the galaxy, and every delegate still sitting in the Grand Rotunda could hear what she was about to say. "This is Admiral Jin Songhua of the United Earth Navy Blackwater Fleet," she said, her voice as steady as stone. "I am transmitting the full technical specifications of our fleet to you now. Weapons yield, shield capacity, engine output, and sensor range, because I want you to understand exactly what you are looking at before you make your next decision." The data streamed across every Thoros bridge display, and the officers who read it felt something that most of them had never felt before in their entire military careers: fear. Each human destroyer, not a battleship, not a dreadnought, a destroyer, the smallest combat vessel in the fleet, carried weapons that could output more destructive energy than a Thoros flagship. Shields on each one could absorb more damage than 3 Thoros dreadnoughts combined, and the engines were powered by something that the Thoros computers labeled simply as unknown, cannot classify. Crethan stood on the bridge of his command ship, the Dominion's Wrath, and stared at the display in front of him, with eyes that had watched 100 species kneel and beg for mercy. And for the first time in his long and violent life, those eyes were wide. "That is impossible," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "They are a Type 1 civilization. They cannot have this." But the numbers did not lie, and the ships floating in the dark before him did not waver, and the voice of the human admiral came through the speakers again. "You have been given complete transparency," Admiral Jin said. "There are no tricks here, no bluffs, and no negotiations. You are looking at the reality you chose to ignore for 83 years. And now, I am asking you very simply, what would you like to do next? The Thoros fleet held its position for 4 hours. 4 hours of silence, of officers staring at impossible numbers, of commanders sending frantic encrypted messages back to Thoros Command, asking for guidance and receiving only confused replies. Of Crethon standing perfectly still on his bridge as the weight of what he was seeing crushed everything he had ever believed about humanity. He did not give the order to attack. He could not. Even his pride, enormous as it was, could not override the basic mathematics of annihilation. And those mathematics were very clear. If the Thoros fleet fired a single shot, the Thoros fleet would cease to exist. Crethon turned away from the display and spoke a single word to his navigation officer. Withdraw. The Thoros armada turned and retreated from Sol's system in silence, and the entire galaxy heard it happen, because Admiral Jin had never closed the open broadcast channel. And every species with ears or sensors or any way of receiving information knew that the most powerful military force in the galaxy had looked at humanity and run. The aftermath was immediate and devastating, not for Earth, but for everyone else. On the Grand Rotunda, delegates sat in stunned silence as the broadcast feeds replayed the confrontation, and the technical data that Jin had transmitted was analyzed by every science council in the Covenant, and every analysis came back with the same conclusion. Humanity's technology was at least 200 years ahead of anything the galaxy currently possessed. On the Rossi homeworlds, the political fallout was catastrophic. Admirals were recalled, generals were questioned, and Crethon found himself facing a council of his own people who demanded to know how the Dominion's intelligence services had failed to detect an entire hidden fleet powered by technology that should not exist. And across the galaxy, on every world that had laughed at humanity 3 days ago, there was a new emotion spreading like a virus through corridors of power and halls of government. Panic. Because then the Covenant intelligence report leaked. It was classified at the highest level, but someone, perhaps deliberately, perhaps not, allowed it to reach the public networks. And what it said was very simple. The Blackwater Fleet was not Earth's only hidden force. It was merely the one they had chosen to reveal. Earth had more. How much more, no one knew. But the intelligence analysts estimated at least 2 additional fleet groups, stationed in locations that Covenant sensors had never been able to reach. And the analysts added a note at the bottom of the report that was perhaps the most terrifying sentence any of them had ever written. We do not know the full extent of humanity's military capability, and we currently have no means of finding out. Admiral Jin stood on the bridge of Prometheus and watched the Thoros fleet shrink to nothing on her sensors, and she allowed herself one slow breath before turning to her communications officer. Send the all clear to Earth, she said, and keep the channel open. Let everyone listen a little longer. She looked out at the stars through the main viewport and thought about the 83 years of patience and silence and insults that had led to this exact moment. And she thought about the faces of every human who had ever been laughed at in the Grand Rotunda. Now they know, she said quietly to no one at all. And now they were afraid. 3 months passed, and the galaxy learned what it meant to live without the species it had spent 83 years laughing at. It was not a lesson anyone enjoyed. Famine warnings were active on 41 worlds where human-designed agricultural systems had failed without their creators to maintain them. And emergency food shipments from neighboring systems were not enough, because the trade routes that used to carry those shipments through Sol System were closed, and the long way around added weeks to every journey. Medical shortages crippled hospitals on over 200 planets, and patients who had been receiving treatments derived from Earth's biosphere data were told that their medications could no longer be produced. And doctors who had worked alongside human colleagues for decades stood in empty labs, and did not know what to do. Communication blackouts spread across entire sectors as relay stations drifted further out of alignment. Had been able to speak to each other instantly, now waited hours or days for messages to arrive. And the political alliances that depended on fast communication began to fracture under the weight of silence and suspicion. The Galactic Covenant was falling apart, and everyone knew why, and everyone knew there was only one way to stop it. Archon Civilith sat alone in his chambers on the Grand Rotunda and stared at the reports piling up on his desk. Economic projections that pointed straight down, military assessments that painted humanity as an unbeatable force, diplomatic cables from dozens of species begging him to do something before the situation got worse. His 4 hands rested on the desk, perfectly still, and his translucent skin had lost its usual glow and turned a pale gray that among the Velnori signaled deep shame. He had been the one who let them laugh. He had been the one who waved away Earth's objections and allowed the vote to proceed. Been the one who granted Crethon the floor to deliver his cruel speech. And now the galaxy was paying the price for his arrogance, and he could feel the weight of it pressing down on him, like gravity from a dying star. He picked up his communicator and did something that no Archon of the Galactic Covenant had done in over 1,000 years. He sent a personal message to Earth. Not a demand, not a summons, not an order, a request. "We would like to talk," was all it said. The reply came 12 hours later, and it was from Ambassador Alara Voss. "We will come to the Rotunda. Prepare the central chamber." 3 days later, Voss walked through the doors of the Grand Rotunda for the second time, and everything was different. The corridors that had once buzzed with casual contempt for the human ambassador were now lined with silent watchers, delegates and aides, and officers who pressed themselves against the walls as she passed, not out of fear, exactly, but out of something deeper, the sudden and uncomfortable awareness that the person walking past them had always been more than they allowed themselves to see. The central chamber was full again, but the energy was nothing like before. No laughter, no amusement, no casual cruelty, just silence and tension, and the particular kind of attention that comes when everyone in a room knows they are about to witness history. Voss entered the chamber and walked across the floor, but this time she did not walk to Earth's small assigned seat in the back corner. She walked to the center dais, the raised platform in the heart of the chamber that was traditionally reserved for the founding species of the Covenant, the ancient civilizations that had built this institution millions of years ago. She stepped up onto it, as if she had always belonged there. No one objected. Archon Civilith looked down at her from his elevated position, and for a long moment, they simply regarded each other. The ancient alien who had thought he understood power, and the human woman who had shown him that he did not. "Ambassador Voss," he said, and his voice was quieter than it had been 3 months ago, stripped of its old authority. "The Covenant is listening." Voss placed her datapad on the podium and looked out at the thousands of faces watching her, and she took one slow breath before she began. "Earth does not wish to destroy the Covenant," she said. "We never did. We helped build it. We bled for it. We poured our knowledge and our labor into it for 83 years. And we did all of this because we believed in the idea of a galaxy that works together." She paused. "But we will not be mocked, and we will not be exploited, and we will not return to a system that treats us as less than what we are. So if the Covenant wants humanity back, it will be on new terms, and those terms are not negotiable." Display above the platform, lit up with a document, clean, clear, and written in every major language in the galaxy. First, full and unconditional recognition of Earth's territorial sovereignty, including an expansion of our borders to reflect the actual scope of human settlement and development, which this body has been deliberately underreporting for decades. The chamber absorbed this in silence. Second, reparations for 83 years of systemic economic exploitation, calculated based on the Covenant's own trade records, to be paid over a period of 50 standard years. Murmuring now, but no objections. Third, a permanent seat on the Covenant's Security Directorate, with full veto power, effective immediately. Louder murmuring. The Security Directorate was the true power behind the Covenant, and only 5 species had ever held seats on it, and none of them had ever been as young as humanity. Fourth, a formal public apology from the Archon of the Galactic Covenant, broadcast to every inhabited world in every member system, acknowledging the systemic mistreatment of Earth and its people. Archon Civilith closed his eyes, and his 4 hands gripped the railing, and he said nothing. And fifth, Voss said, and now her voice carried something new, not anger, not triumph, but something that sounded almost like hope. A binding amendment to the Covenant's founding charter that establishes a universal protection clause for all younger species. Any future mockery, marginalization, exploitation, or systemic mistreatment of a newer member by this body or its members will trigger an automatic review, with humanity serving as the guarantor of that process. She looked up at the chamber. We did not do this just for ourselves, she said. We did this because somewhere out there, right now, another young species is looking up at the stars and wondering if the galaxy will welcome them or crush them. And we want the answer to that question to be different than the one we received. The chamber was completely still. Delegate Crethon's seat was empty. It had been empty for 2 weeks, ever since the Thorosi Dominion's government collapsed under the weight of military humiliation and economic freefall, torn apart by internal factions that blamed each other for the disaster. And the species that had called humanity mold on a shoe could not even hold itself together long enough to attend the session. The vote was called. It passed unanimously. Every single species, every single delegate, every single vote cast in favor of Earth's terms, and the display above the platform showed the count in glowing numbers that filled the chamber with light. Archon Civilith descended from his elevated position and walked slowly to the central dais. And he stood before Ambassador Voss, and he was a creature 9 feet tall, with skin like moonlight and the weight of an ancient civilization on his shoulders. And she was a human woman in a dark suit who stood barely past his chest. He bowed, all forearms folded in the deepest gesture of respect the Velnari people knew. And he turned to face the chamber and the galaxy beyond it. On behalf of the Galactic Covenant, he said, and his voice was carried by every broadcast system on the station to every world in every system that could receive it. I offer a full and unconditional apology to the people of Earth for the failures of this institution, for the treaties we broke, the calls we ignored, the contempt we showed, and the laughter we allowed. And we recognize that humanity has always been worthy of the seat it now rightfully holds. His words echoed through the grand rotunda and out into the stars, and on 600 worlds and 1,000 stations and 1,000,000 ships, beings of every shape and size and origin heard them and understood that the galaxy had changed. And the delegates filed out in silence, and the massive chamber slowly emptied until only Voss remained, standing on the center dais and looking up at the vast domed ceiling that showed the stars beyond the station's hall. Her earpiece crackled. "How does it feel?" asked Director Cole from 6,000 light-years away. Voss thought about the question, thought about the 83 years of patience, the generations of men and women who had snarled through insults and signed unfair treaties and built impossible things in the dark, knowing that they themselves might never see the day when it mattered. It feels like they will remember, she said. And far away, on Earth, in a small classroom filled with morning sunlight, a teacher was telling her students about the Galactic Council, about the vast family of species that lived among the stars, and a child in the front row raised her hand. "Why do they respect us now?" the child asked. Smiled, the kind of smile that held a story too big to tell all at once, but too important to ever forget. "Because we made sure they had to," she said. And somewhere in the deep black between the stars, the Blackwater fleet drifted in perfect silence, its engines humming with the impossible energy of a species that had never been what the galaxy thought it was, patient and quiet and unbreakable, 1,000 points of light in the dark, watching, waiting, and ready.